know that you were out on this wintry night and wanting to hear about education in Great Falls in Montana. Good idea. Anyway, we've been talking about what's going to happen in our legislature. We've been talking about what hasn't happened and what are the threats to public education in Great Falls and Montana. So I'm Jerry Jennings, and I'm president and founder of Great Falls Rising, which the founding occurred 8 years ago when people had kind of lost hope. And I was thinking maybe this would go for 4 years and then, we don't have to do this anymore. But needless to say, we have to continue with it. And it's a way to elevate hope and get some action. Let me tell you what the mission statement is. It's a bit long, which is not good for mission statements, but it does tell what we do. Great Falls Rising is a nonpartisan progressive movement that empowers individuals and connects communities while fostering equality, diversity, human rights, civil liberty, and a sustainable future through respectful dialogue, education, and advocacy. Now, that's a pretty good goal, isn't it? I think it's a good goal, especially when we're talking about education. So here we are 8 years later, clinging to that hope and pleading to our supporters to activate. We know that our panelists will give us good information, and but information can only go just so far. We have to support the information that comes from our public schools and do something about it. And in this legislative year, that's really, really important. So why are we focusing on public education when there are so many issues before us right now? Well, here are a few quotes for you. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So think about each one of these. John Dewey said, education is not preparation for life, it is life itself. Victor Hugo prophesied, I'm going to say he or she, who opens a school door closes a prison. And finally, Martin Luther King Jr. stated, intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. So I think we can put all these together and realize how important our education system is. So tonight we'll be introduced to school funding, something most of us know little about, and something that needs overhaul. Also, mental health for kids and teachers is an overriding concern. And how about concerns about teachers retiring early or just leaving our schools for greener pastures? Hold on to your hats, we're going to learn a lot. And to introduce our panelists, this is in order of alphabet. Bill Bronson is a local lawyer and a trustee for Great Falls Public Schools. Jamie Marshall is chair of KEY, Kids Education Yes, which is a volunteer group that does a lot for the schools. She's also vice chair of Great Falls Public Schools Foundation. Brian Patrick is director of business operations for Great Falls Public Schools. And last but not least, Nichole Pieper is superintendent of the Power Public School District. And at this point, I have to introduce Dawn Sievers, who is the Montana Teacher of the Year. So Dawn, would you please stand up? Oh, I need to add, she's a teacher in power. So Don Ryan is our moderator, and when the panelists finish the first round of questions, we'll open it up to those of you who have turned in questions on index cards. Melissa Smith will moderate that portion of the evening. Thanks to the Celtic Cowboy for the use of the dark horse, Chris Stein for setting it up and bartending, our Great Falls Rising Board of Directors for arranging the gathering, our panelists for their dedication to public education, and you for attending. Also, I want to add thanks to Matt Hudson with the Montana Free Press and Tommy from KRTV for coming from the media. Is there any other media here that I've missed? Okay, I know that all of you have computers that you can tell everybody, but this is our our media. So thanks again, and Don, you're on.
Thank you, Terry. That's a little loud. I'm going to take the liberty of trying to explain to you how we got to this situation where schools are dire funding and that type of stuff. It comes from our Montana Constitution. In 1972, we put a couple phrases into our Constitution. One said that we're going to basically have equality of educational opportunity to all our students. And the other key phrase was a free, quality public education, secondary public education. Those two are the key phrases. And what we did at that time, when the legislature then met and we've adopted the Constitution, we had an old system called the Foundation Program. And that Foundation Program said the state's going to give every district a certain amount of money, and then any additional money you want comes from local resources. It could be from your taxes, some of it was from car licenses that were done in an area, some was from mineral taxes, all the different things that you have locally available to you. There are 400 school districts at that time, plus 400 school districts in Montana at that time, all right? Then what happened was, we lived with that system for a while, but with those 400 districts, we had different abilities for them to raise revenue. And we had a lawsuit called Helena versus the state of Montana. And that's when people got together and said, you know what, this funding formula doesn't work. There's inequality in it. The quality available to education, it's not equal. It's inequality. So the legislature met, okay, and they worked on the system to do this. Now, I talked to one of the people that was heavily involved with that guy named Jim Gillett. He worked in the auditor's office. Now, how they did it was they took the 400 districts in the state of Montana, and they said, starting with the smallest district right here, and we go all the way up to the largest district up here. And then they took all 400 districts and basically took a pin and said, okay, district number 1 down here at the bottom, the small one, how much are you spending per pupil? They put a dot. Then they went to the next one and they put a dot. Then they went to the next one and they put a dot. And they went all the way up. And you had some very high and some very low, based on their ability to raise revenue. And from that, they said, this proves the inequality. Now, why did some place high, some low? I'll give you the closest local example I could think of. And that is the Centerville School District and the Belt School District. Both small agricultural-based communities. Why are they able to get more revenue in Belton than they are in Centerville? Because there's a power dam within the district in Belton that pays a lot of taxes. There isn't one in Centerville. So in order to raise $100,000, you have to tax the homeowners a lot more in Centerville than you do in Belton. That was one of the inequalities that we had. So how this legislature back then dealt with this issue was they looked at that chart and they said, here's the line, here's the highs, here's the lows. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what everybody's spending. And we're going to say, okay, how much should this district get? And then this there. So they put a cap. Here's what we're going to do. This is how much these good spending districts do. And that cap was a combination of the basic entitlement, how much we give you to an elementary district, how much we give to a high school district, and then a per pupil number added on top of that. Each pupil's worth so much. The 100% level, or the cap, is how much, if you levied everything you can only spend this much in your general fund across all the state. Now, there's something called the base. They're allowing districts to say, you don't have to spend 100% level. You can go down to 80. That's the base, this is the cap. And that's what we have now in our system, base and the cap. Now, one of the things that happened during that time is the fact that there were so many districts that were below that base level. They were given 5 years. in which to slowly raise their property taxes to get to that minimum level. Now, I happened to be working in a district in Stevensville at that time who didn't run mill levies. And those people were very upset that each year they had to raise their taxes because we had to get to a certain level of spending because they didn't think we should do that. Other people at the top, like the district that I had worked in Colstrip, they were far above it. And they were told, you got to hold the line. You can't spend any more. You just let us catch up to you. That's what we ended up with the system. It took us 5 years to get to that point, but that's how we got to this system right now. And just to give you a baseline is what you get now in an elementary district, and this is not exactly, but it's about $60,000. Here's your base entitlement for an elementary district. Your high school districts, once you get $383,000, some number in that number, and then you get a certain amount per child that goes through that. So that's how we figured out the funding. And that was the result. That was how we equalized funding in the state of Montana. That worked for a while. All right. Then the second part of the Constitution talks about the ability to get a quality education. And Columbia Falls lawsuit versus the state of Montana said, you're not giving us enough money to get quality. Because in order to get quality, you have to meet accreditation standards. You have to do with the Board of Public Health. You have to have certified teachers. You have to have this, and we couldn't get to that spot. So what do we do if we want to get to quality? The Supreme Court said, before we allow you to raise funds, you have to define what a quality education is. And that was the first thing that the legislature had to do, is define quality. And I sat on many different committees, some are interim committees and those types of things, trying to say, okay, now how are we going to deal with this? I remember sitting in the legislature one morning at 7 o'clock. We met in Senator Tester's office. He was the Senate president at that time. And the people that I knew, who the group was basically called Ed Forward, they came over and said, this is what we want. And we had people from the teachers union was there, the school boards association, the school administrators were there. I mean, we had everybody there. They wanted flexibility in their spending, they wanted things. And they said, this is, I call it the Christmas tree. Here's what we really want. So I put those things in a bill. We got it through the Senate. But by the time we got it through the Senate, a fellow by the name of Bob Keenan had done a little financial work. And he said, well, there's some problems here because we're giving you flexibility. If you got extra money in this fund, you can stick it over here. And then you can turn around and fill that fund back up with taxes. Or you can take this and move it. Or we're paying for teachers. I'll move along, Jerry. I just want people to understand where we ended up. Okay, and this is it. It was this Christmas tree. Well, guess what happened? You know, that bill didn't get a vote, one single vote in the House, because the Democrats talked about how much it was going to increase your property taxes, and it died. So we had to have a special session, and we had to have interim committees to deal with it. We sat and worked with that a long time, and the politics committed as people. It's not so easy to say, this is what we should do. You have to deal with the political aspect, because everybody's voting who's going to affect their district. Politics is the art of the possible. It's not just the dream. So our committee could not come to a solution. So we put a bill up that had a Christmas tree there again. And I voted, I told them I recommend we vote for it. John Tester, Monica Landine said, we can't vote for this, we're gonna run for office, they're gonna kill us. I said, well, okay, so it died. So the committee stopped, we couldn't come to a solution, we went down to Governor Schweitzer's office. Governor Schweitzer says, okay, I've got an idea. And what he did is he put together some of the factors of the current funding formula that is in addition to what we pay per student, okay? And those components were an Indian Achievement Gap component. In other words, these Native kids, because of their background, we need to put a little bit more money for all the Native students you have. We had a quality educator component. For the number of professionals you have to hire to run your district, we're going to give you additional money for that. We have an at-risk. These kids that are at risk and have these problems, we're going to put a component in for that. This was the first time the legislature had looked and said, not all students are the same. And it does cost more to deal with some kids in their situation. So that's why those components are there. We had a component for education for all. And at that time, testing was one of those things that they wanted to do. So we put an educational testing component in per child. And that's where we got to our system today. Now, one of the other things that came with that bill was the fact that we put a cap, basically saying a 3% increase unless the legislature increases in a year. Well, we know that inflation moves more than 3%. So we started to fall behind. So that, my friends, you understood that. You now know more than 50% of the legislature. I appreciate it because they don't. But now I really am pleased with this panel because we have two people here who are volunteers that work in education. Okay, our school board member and Jamie McKee. So we have two people that are paid for, get money from school districts, Nichole Pieper from Power and Brian. They understand it very well. So I'm going to ask some questions. The first question I want to ask you, and each one of you can come up with your answer or chime in. But you play an important yet different role in public education. How do you see your role and what are the demands and your expectations now? And Jamie, I'm going to start with you.
I am grateful to be here tonight wearing the hat really truly of a parent and a community member. So people often say to me, what do you really do? And my first answer is I'm a mom. So we have 3 children currently in the Great Falls public school system. When our oldest, who is now 14, she just got her learner's permit this night. But when she was 4, I showed up at Brian Patrick's door with a few other moms and said, how do we fund schools in Montana? And Brian graciously and patiently began to teach us, and a decade later, we are still running. So I am here tonight truly as a parent and as that community member to share what I have learned in my decade walk as a mom, but also to invite all of us, and if you're here tonight, I know we're in the same camp already, to have that role of ever learning. The system ever changes. It's really hard to put a dollar figure to a child or a student, and yet that's what we have to do when it comes to funding and when we're speaking with the legislators. So being able to have open hearts and minds and learning and being able to speak what we know we need in our own home, in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, and to have that hard but collaborative dialogue. There is no easy solution. At times we have to make some compromises. That's what my role is tonight, is to have that parent lens, to better understand from each of you what your questions are, and to take those back and learn.
Thanks, Jamie. Obviously, I'm going to share with you this evening the perspectives of somebody who's a school board trustee, but to put it in a broader context, I am a product of the Great Falls public school system. When my family moved here in the 1960s, I attended a school known as Margin Elementary School. I see some smiles out there. You probably remember it truly was an inner city school for Montana. It now houses Many Rivers Hotel. I then went to what was called Paris Gibson Junior High School. You know it today, the northern part as Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art. The southern portion, you will remember, was unceremoniously blown up as a prop for the Charlie Bronson movie Telephone in 1975. I then went on to C.M. Russell High School, where I received my high school diploma in 1973. And I use that as a measure because the one school is gone, it's a mental health facility. The other one was blown up in part as an art museum. CMR thankfully is still there. Once something drastic happens to that, I know I will have spent as much time on earth as I'm going to be allowed to have. But as a trustee, the thing that I like to emphasize, and my 6 colleagues on the board already know this because I'm sure sometimes they think I harp on it too much, but it is nevertheless important. I go back to what our new Constitution says, Article 10, Section 8, which states very clearly, very succinctly, the supervision and control of schools in each school district shall be vested in a board of trustees to be elected as provided by law. Many people do not realize the significance of that statement. The significance is this: school board trustees are essentially a fourth branch of government in the state of Montana, somewhat on par with our legislature, our executive, and our judiciary. And if you add to the fact that our state board of regents, which oversees higher education, basically is under the same mandate. They have supervision and control of the university system. So they are truly a fifth branch of government. That places upon elected trustees like myself and my colleagues a tremendous responsibility. We are overseers of a constitutional obligation to do the very things that Don was talking about earlier, to ensure that our young people achieve their full academic potential, that we promote equality of educational opportunity, and that we promote and provide a quality public education for our young people. That imposes upon us as trustees a great responsibility to make sure that the policies that we craft, which are just like the laws that the legislature crafts, are appropriate for our young people and for the circumstances in which they get their education. That requires every trustee to become very deeply immersed in a lot of detail in what goes on in our district. And as has already been pointed out, we get to do it for free. But as one of my former colleagues on the trustees used to say, there is a paycheck for us. And our paycheck is at the end of May, first part of every June. We get to see young people from our 3 high schools graduate. That's our paycheck. And let me tell you, it is a marvelous feeling when you see those young people up there and you know a lot about their accomplishments. Because in several instances, we as trustees have had the opportunity to look at scholarship applications. We've gone into the schools and talked with these young people. We've seen them, we've listened to them, and let me tell you, we feel a whole heck of a lot better when they get that diploma and they go out to choose or pursue whatever career it is they decide. So to sum it up, my perspective as a trustee is grounded in a very important constitutional obligation. And some of the things that I will be saying tonight will ultimately be rooted in that.
Hi, I'm Nichole Pieper, and I have a long history in education in Montana. My grandparents on my mother's side were both teachers in Billings. My grandfather on my father's side was, he retired as the superintendent in Lockwood. My great uncle Gene just passed away a few weeks ago. He was noticed as, he was inducted into the Coaches Hall of Fame here in Great Falls, Dr. Gene Espeland. My great uncle Pat Sherman is in the Referees Hall of Fame. And so my sister is, she was a counselor at Great Falls High. And all my cousins have seemed to find their way into education as well as teachers. And I graduated from Helena High and grew up here in Montana. Then I decided to jump up to Alaska for an adventure where I taught elementary school for a while and was an instructional coach. And then I had children and discovered that I really missed not being close to my parents and my family. And so the second that a principal job opened up in Cascade, where my husband and I purchased property 6 years prior. We moved down here in 2019, right before COVID hit, and the rest is history. And I'm so happy that I'm back here in Montana and I'm working in education, and it's the best job I've ever had. And I see my job as a person to connect people and ideas, and to champion students and staff and community I just try to help as many people as I can and to be a lifelong learner myself and set a good example.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Patrick. My educational career started in a one-room schoolhouse 6 miles from the Canadian border. And I really felt like I got somewhere when I went into second grade. I got to ride on a bus for 25 miles to go to school, and I graduated with a class of 15. In college, I went to Western and then taught at Townsend. And while I was doing that, I got my master's degree in Bozeman. And served as a superintendent of the state for 18 years. And before coming to Great Falls in 2011. I've been here since then as a director of business operations. And my role as a business manager that I see it as Great Falls, in Great Falls, is to be part of a team. That part of the team is stewardship of public funds. And the team includes the cabinet and the board of trustees. And that budget process is an annual process. It starts in July, and we meet throughout the year, look at key benchmarks like enrollment counts in October and February, and work through what we need to get a balanced budget by the end of the next year. When I came to Great Falls, there were a lot of questions about school spending, where the money was being spent, how it was being spent, how much money was in this fund, and why, and how, and just millions of questions. So one of the things that I put together was it's called a budget book. But the cover of it, for me, is really important because it's students. We direct our funding toward programming for students. It's not about anything other than that. And the programs that we can offer them and how we offer those programs. And from my perspective, I sit in the hot seat when it comes to a balanced budget, making things so that at the end of the year, we've got money to pay all our bills. And for me, as another key component is our auditors. They come in, and my goal every year is to have a clean audit because that's public trust of how the funds are being spent and what's happening there. And like you and me both in our personal lives, as a business manager, have to deal with inflation. And it's really hit schools hard, just like it's hit all of us hard. As another one of my job titles is facilities. Responsible for the facilities, and the biggest part of that is safe schools. And in the past 8 years, 10 years, it's changed dramatically. I remember when a parent could walk into a building at any time, probably walk right into their kids' classrooms. That's changed, and it's surprising how quickly it changed, and it changed for good reason. So Safe Schools deals with doors and drills, making sure the doors are secure and the drills happen that everybody knows what to do in the case of an emergency. And then this time of year also encompasses a little bit of snow removal because there's a lot of slips and falls with 10,000 students and teachers and staff all over the place. And then the other part of it is, as district clerk, and what Bill alluded to, is just implementing the new laws. Anytime the legislature meets, there's a ton of new laws and working through the policy and that. And the last part is just staffing. It's important for our district to attract and retain staff, attract new teachers to come here, and retain our good experienced teachers, or the mentors for those new teachers that show up. And that's extremely become difficult because there's a lot of competition, things like 4-day weeks in smaller schools. And there's not a lot of teachers, surprisingly, it's not like it used to be, where you'd open up a job and there'd be a lot of applicants. We're struggling to find people, not only teachers, but anybody to work in the school system, whether you're a lunch aide, educational aide, or whatever the case is. So that's really been a challenge. And that dips into the budget part of it, because to attract teachers, we obviously, and any school staff, we have to raise our salaries. Yeah, that's all about me.
It does remind me how small a state Montana is the fact that I refereed with Pat Sherman. I played against Gene Esco. You know, I mean, it really is, it goes back. But the first question we're going to ask is going to go to Mr. Bronson. Teacher retention and recruitment is a problem in every district in the state. Great Falls loses about 10% of its teachers every year. And our salary schedule, starting salary is now 43rd in the nation. We used to be one of the top progressive places to go through to go back. There's several ideas that have been out there. Statewide salary schedule, signing bonuses, teacher housing, mentorship, separate funding formula for AA, B, C schools. Try something along that line. And there's several ideas floating out how we can do this, how we can get more teachers back into Montana. But my question to Mr. Bronson is, as a local board member, what are your thoughts? And as a Montana School Board Association, how is your organization addressing this issue?
Well, I'm going to mention three things very briefly, and then I'm going to go back and touch on each of them in a little bit more detail. And I'm not going to suggest that these three items are exclusive to answering this particular question or set of questions. But I do think if you spoke to any of my colleagues, all of us would mention at least one, if not all of three of these, when asked the same question. Number one, we need to support efforts in the current legislature to change the way that we provide for payment of teacher salaries in the state of Montana. And as I said, I'll go into a little bit more detail about that here shortly. Second, we need in this district to continue with what I regard as a robust recruitment and retention plan that many other districts in the state are now looking at us and saying Great Falls is doing something that we need to do. And again, I'll touch on the details here momentarily. And then finally, for all of you in the audience, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, guardian, please support our teachers, their efforts to educate our young people and to help them maintain decorum in the classroom. That shouldn't require a lot of explanation, but I will give you a few details that you need to follow. Let's go back to state funding. Our school district is a member of the Montana School Boards Association, which I've come to enjoy as a very effective and very powerful organization for our interests as trustees promoting the education of our young people. For roughly the last year, we have been working with several key legislators on both sides of the aisle and the government to come up with a plan to enhance teachers' salaries throughout the state of Montana, not just to aid the large schools, but to also aid our smaller schools as well. We don't have enough time this evening to go into all of the details of it. I will tell you we have a name for it. We will probably, or you may have already heard the name STARS, or the STARS Act. It's simply an abbreviation for Student and Teacher Advancement for Results and Success. But this legislation is critical because if it goes through as we envision, it will not only mean that we address a lot of the immediate issues with the lack of staying abreast of inflation, building a better base salary for our younger teachers, we hope to be able to build this into the funding formula that Don was talking about earlier this evening. Because if we can make teacher pay a larger component of the state funding formula, then we will have gone a long way to address many of the problems in our teacher pay situation. We will no longer be toward the bottom. We'll start moving up toward the middle of the pack. I do want to emphasize, though, again, this is a bipartisan effort. There's a lot of folks, and I've listened to a couple of presentations at some other educational forums recently, and they've talked about threats to public education and all of the horrible problems that are happening out there. And while I don't discount many of these concerns, I would like people to think not so much about threats as opportunities. We have some tremendous opportunities here because of the level of bipartisan cooperation we have to get to the goal I'm talking about. Recruitment and retention. For the last few years, our district has done an annual outreach to the teacher colleges, inviting these young juniors and seniors who are thinking about going into education to come to our community and see what it's like, and see what we have to offer them as a young teacher starting out in the Great Falls Public Schools. That program has been very successful in getting some of our young folks in Western, Banff, Bozeman, some of the private colleges to think about Great Falls as an option. And we have many advantages here. We have wonderful schools. We have a much lower cost of living than some of our sister cities. We have many attributes here that make this very attractive. And it's just a reminder, you can't wait for these people to come to you. You have to go to them and convince them of the merits of signing up to teach in Great Falls Public Schools. The other component of that is retention. We don't just let our young teachers drift in their first year. We get them together at least once or twice during the course of the year. And I've left some materials on the desk here, if you haven't already seen them. It gives you a good example of some of the programs that our staff put together to bring these young folks together, make them realize that their first year in teaching, they are not alone. There are many others here like themselves, and there are more senior teachers who are willing to help them. And hopefully, that's part of their decision-making process in deciding to stay. And finally, supporting our teachers. I say that with a little bit of background. My mother was an educator in high schools and also briefly in the university in this state for 40-some years. I heard enough stories growing up about how many times when my mother would try to work with young people, help them achieve their full potential, oftentimes the biggest roadblock was not the young person. It was the parent or parents, or should I say in some cases, the lack of parents or the lack of somebody to care for the child. If you really want to see your child succeed, you as a parent, grandparent, guardian, neighbor, friend, work with those teachers. We are entrusting your children with people who have dedicated their lives to helping these young people achieve so much. We owe those teachers the time and the effort to back them up, to help them do their job. When they don't feel that kind of support, that is a factor that sometimes makes people decide, I don't want to be in teaching. It's the wrong message to send. I don't like to hear people say that that's the reason we're leaving the teaching profession. We should be encouraging those folks again, because without that encouragement, then we lose a critical component of the whole recruitment and retention process.
Would anybody like to add to that? Nichole?
So I just wanted to say that I'm very fortunate at Power, and whenever I have a teaching position that becomes available, the other teachers that are in the building are calling up their teaching friends and saying, hey, this job just opened up, you need to apply for it. And that is why I'm fully staffed. And I am so grateful for it. And I really do credit the fact that we've got such a supportive community as why those teachers stay at Power for a very long time. And so I just kind of wanted to give a shout out to the support in the community and supportive parents. I wanted to touch on some of the different funding ideas that have been mentioned, especially in rural schools. We are asked to have certified staff in every position. We're basically being asked to fund a AA district, but we don't have the students to support that. And so where a larger district, there's 25 students in a classroom, I've got 5 students in a classroom. My second grade has 2 kiddos. And so then we end up combining a lot of classrooms. And I know that larger districts also have that issue too. But you can only combine so many grade levels before the education really starts to fall. And so we try not to do that as best we can, but then, I mean, 90% of our budget goes towards personnel. And I know that that's pretty typical for most districts. And so it ties our hands as far as what we can pay our teachers and still provide textbooks and athletic events and other extracurricular curricular activities for our students. And those are also important to growing people. And so sometimes it's really hard to make those tough decisions. And it would be really nice to pay our teachers what they're worth. These are highly educated people. Most of them, they don't stop at a bachelor's degree. They have master's degrees, but they're getting paid less than what somebody is probably getting paid working at Taco Bell. I've seen their advertisements, and every time I drive by the $20 an hour, I just cringe, and I'm going, I really, really hope my teachers don't see that billboard sign. Every time that we take our students to the worlds of work and our kids get exposed to all these amazing careers, I hope my teachers do not look at some of those tables and take flyers, because we cannot do this without them. They are amazing, and we're not paying them up to what inflation is increasing, and that is just, it's so heartbreaking. So that's my 2 cents.
One other thing that's new in Great Falls this year is a school at Morningside Elementary, where we're working in conjunction with Western Montana College, where people can come in and get their teaching degree while they work with students, while they work with master teachers, with the understanding that hopefully they'll come, go through that program and say, hey, Great Falls is a great place to work. We want to stay here and work here. So that's been a unique, wonderful program that's working out very well, and hope to see great success from being able to retain those teachers that come here to learn how to teach.
Brian, I just want to say, I heard a grandmother tell me today how pleased she was because her grandson is at Morningside. And she said he's having a tremendous year. It's such a change. So it's working for the kids, and it's also working to develop future teachers that are going to work well and be well trained by the time they come in and do full time. So I'm a very big supporter of that. And also, Mr. Bronson, I'm glad to see a fellow alumni of Largent do so well. Next question goes to Jamie, who works with Key Kids Education. Yes, our public schools are experiencing a lot of difficulty with kids who come with a lot of different problems, different than what we used to, how we could handle them before. Some with mental problem issues that point kids attempting suicide. You know, what are your thoughts, and how do you think we should combat this problem? Not an easy question.
No, it's not. And I think I'll start out by just acknowledging statistically in this room, virtually all of us are impacted somehow when we bring up the topic of mental health, whether it's in our families, within our friends, within colleagues, or for some of us, perhaps even for ourselves, something that we're working through. So I just want to own that right off the top. It is not an easy topic, and we won't have time to solve it in the next 3 minutes. But I will just share a couple of thoughts that I have had as a parent, but also as a member of this community. The opportunity, and I invite all of you, and I know there are some principals in the room and teachers and administrators, and I think it's okay for me to say this. If you have not had the opportunity to be in a classroom in our public schools in the last number of years, I would invite you to contact your neighborhood school and ask for the opportunity to come visit. To be able to be in a classroom and to watch the amazing work that teachers are doing that was just spoken to, but to also see what children are experiencing in 21st century world is eye-opening. It really is. I have the opportunity to volunteer in an elementary school almost every day. There is a principal in this room who for a time was overseeing the care of my children, but I watched how many hours a day were required of even administrators to support children who were in crisis. It's tremendous. And it really does impact education. What they are able to do as teachers, what peers are able to do at any age. We're talking our transitional kindergarten, those 3 and 4 year olds, all the way up to 12 and beyond. It looks different than it did a number of years ago. it is something that I know the legislature is trying to address. There is not a one size fits all solution to individuals, particularly when we overlay mental health challenges. That means there's not a one size fits all solution that can come about through policy. But I am grateful to see that there is some support, even in the governor's budget, to look at how we can be financially supporting behavioral supports in schools. And I know as a parent, that is something I'm continuing to advocate that we certainly make available. Like I said at the beginning, it's hard to put a price tag to a student or a human. That's not how I approach things. But again, when we're looking at policy, and at times even politics, being able to make sure that the funding to support knowing those needs are there is a first step in the right direction. It is a very individualized approach, however. I will speak from a parent lens of one innovative approach that Great Falls Public Schools has engaged in the last number of years. I have a 9th grader and now a 7th grader who've had the chance to be what's called a peer mentor. And I know they're looking at semantics and maybe changing that model name. But over the last few years, really since COVID, Great Falls Public Schools has been very diligent in supporting behavioral supports in every school in some way with school psychologists and school counselors, and they've been able to bring training in for students to be able to better learn and identify emotional health, care, coping, really focusing on some true behavioral supports in a preventive approach before it ever starts. And if you have the opportunity to speak to a peer mentor in the Great Falls community, I can guarantee you it will be eye-opening what those students can teach you and share with you. I'll pause there. Well, I know.
Oh, you go first.
I just want to add 2 things to what Jamie was talking about. A couple of things. One, many people are not aware the school district employs its own staff of mental health professionals. I wish I could say that we had enough for each school at every time of day. We don't. But the individuals that we do employ work incredibly hard to identify and address and hopefully eradicate some of the mental health issues that we do see in our school system today. If anyone thinks that that's not a critical component of education, I invite you to do just as Jamie said, come into a classroom and perhaps see some of those challenges exhibit themselves in a classroom environment, and then watch how we try to deal with that situation. The other thing, very quickly, I know some of you have been hearing about this great interest in cell phone usage by our young people. I'm proud to say that within the last several weeks, the Board of Trustees unanimously adopted a policy that our staff and Trustee Churosky and I worked on to basically curtail the use of cell phones during the day by our young people. It's a marvelous little piece of technology, but again, I think we've learned to be a little bit more like the Amish, our friends. When new technologies come along, don't just accept them, carte blanche and start using them across the board. Think about the ramifications. In the case of young people, who are very impressionable, whose minds are still forming, whose worldly experiences are still coming very slowly, they don't need to have that divisive, potentially divisive tool in their heads every moment of the day. We entered into that policy very deliberately. We experimented in a few of the schools first to see what the impact would be. And the decision maker for me was when I spoke to our Great Falls High principal, Jeff Hoffman, after they instituted a policy there last year. And I said, Jeff, are you seeing a difference? And he said, yes, we are. The incidents of bullying are going down. Some of the nervousness and the tenseness in our young people, that constant desire to grab onto that little electronic monstrosity and live your day by it, was going away, and it was starting to show some positive signs in our young people. That was enough for me. I was already there, but I wanted to hear a professional educator tell me that. So, and I should mention, that's something that we did on our own. Governor Gianforte had reached out to school districts across the state, asking them to consider this. We all very much appreciated the governor's interest in it as well, but we were already there and we already had a solution to the problem.
Fantastic.
Raise your hand if you have heard of Montana Cares Act or app. Okay, good. Some people have. If you have not, I really encourage you to check this out. And this is one thing that the state has purchased for schools, and it is amazing. Basically, it is an app that you can, that students can download, and you can also put a link on your website, and they can click on that, and they can either self-report or they could also report for somebody else. And it is a long list of things that they can report. If they know that a friend needs clothing or food, they can get on there and say, please help this person. They need food. And that goes in our district. I get a notice, our counselor gets a notice, and together, and if we don't respond within a few minutes to the text message or the phone call, then it goes to the Teton County Police, and then they try to get hold of us. And if it's a mental health issue, the app has mental health professionals on site ready to talk to these students if they say that they need help. And so I really hope that more people know about this and find out about it and support it, because we've only had in the last 2 years that we've been using the app at Power, we've only had 3 students actually use it. And I'm just so glad that that resource was available for those 3 kids, because what would have happened if they didn't have a way to reach out? I don't even want to think about it. And just Monday night, I was called by the Teton County Sheriff's Office, and they were looking for a student that was reportedly suicidal. And my heart just sunk when they told me the name and the birth date, and that kid was not in my school district. And so now I'm stressed out and I'm worrying about where is this kid? And so I suggested the other schools that maybe they're at. But those things happen. They happen more than they should and more than we ever want them to. But we need to empower the people who are there to try and figure out how to get help to those kids. And that's going to be your school districts, and that's going to be your sheriffs and your troopers and all of those first responders. They are so important to help with that mental health pandemic that is coming through our society.
Sure. What does it cost?
Because the next one's coming to you, Brian, anyway. This question basically says, we often hear about potential cuts in school budgets. But people at the state level said, each year we're giving them more money. How can both be true? Well, they both are true, because we have not kept up with the rate of inflation. And it's not just teacher salaries, it's those personnel. It's the workers that come in the kitchen and that kind of stuff, if they can go to Taco Bell and make more money. And all of those things, and bus drivers. So what do you, Brian, think are the most important changes in policy or practice that need to positively affect our school district? What do you recommend?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think the state hasn't kept up on the inflation side of the equation. Over the last 6 years, inflation compared to the consumer price index has been 10.5% or 10.7, excuse me, 10.75% behind. So I think to give you some examples where things shake out at the school, because I know you all probably have lawns and things like that, and you've seen your city water bills. For the school district, we're paying $67,000 more for our water, to water lawns and all the water we use in the school year. Elections cost $20,000 more. Property liability insurance is over $500,000 increase. Our technology program that we operate, our human resources office, all our business functions, has increased by $22,000. And Pieper, one of the substantial things that we use, averaged about $22 a case for a lot of years. In 22-23, due to COVID, it went up to $46 a case. Currently, it's down to 32.50, so it's coming down, but probably not fast enough. So those are some of the things that we deal with when it comes to inflation. The other part of the component is when I look at the funding mechanism, like Dawn talked about, was student enrollment is a big driver. It's 81.6% of the budget is made up by the number of students we have. And a study of Great Falls population, we've been about at 10,400 students for a long time. And it's ebbed and flowed in elementary and high school. Some years the elementary is gaining and the high school is losing, and then it flips as those kids get into high school, but causes some discrepancies between the elementary budget and the high school budget. But with that, back to inflation just for a second, to give you an idea that in 17-18, the state inflation increase was 1.79%. 18-19, 0.5%. 19-20, 1.87%. 2021, 0.91%. To give you an idea of how much it costs, if we were to give every employee in our district a 1% raise, that's a $700,000 hit to our budget. So when we try to attract and retain teachers and we offer 4%, you can see very quickly that's not going to keep up with inflation. And really, you know, another component that ties into this is health insurance. Last year it went up by 10% for our employees and the district. And what that means to an employee is $1,169 more per year comes out of their check to pay for health insurance. And the total premium is just under $3,000. So the district gets to eat those costs as well. And in enrollment, I think in the state, if you're in a district like Bozeman or Belgrade, where you're getting more students every year, your budgets are fine. If you're in a district that's declining, you're going the wrong way, especially with 81.6% of the budget based on student numbers. And I know this legislative session, I think some of the talk has been to balance that out a little bit, not have it rely so much on student numbers. The other thing on insurance for a second too is that we're really the only governmental agency that can't permissively levy increases. The county and the city can, as their insurance goes up, they can just levy that permissively. We have to take that out of our budget. So it hits our budget pretty effectively. So I think from my perspective, the funding formula that was developed in 1989 was a sound formula because it set a maximum and a minimum for schools. And it created that balance and equity between all schools in Montana. And levy wise, we have the ability to go out for levies. 20% of the budget is community driven. The system was purposely designed to say the state will provide 80% of the budget, and it's up to local communities to step up to the plate and make up that difference. And really, we don't go out for levies very often. We've gone out for 4 levies since 2007, and that's 18 years. We've had 4 levies. And I know it bothers me when we actually go out to a levy and people say, well, the school asks every year for money. And our situation is a little different from Bozeman, where we go out for money when we really need it, and we ask for high amounts like $1.7, $1.6 million. Bozeman is in a situation where they're right up next to the cap, so when they ask people for money, it's like $400,000, $200,000, and on the impact on their house is like $3. So it's like, sure, we'll support that, but for us, it's a big ask. We set ourselves up to ask for big amounts, and then it's a hard decision. So if we were to change anything, I'd recommend probably it'd be nice to be in that Bozeman model where people were used to saying, yeah, I support kids and education, and it's not going to cost me a lot of money.
I have notes for every single question, so I did my homework. I just wanted to talk about the insurance pool that came through the last legislative session for public schools, and it's really frustrating because a lot of public school employees don't opt for the insurance. they take the insurance with their spouse or they find private insurance. And so it, when they put stipulations on that we need so many lives and it's like, well, yeah, that would be extremely achievable if every school employee took the school insurance, but they just don't. And so I know that there have been multiple meetings that have happened in order to try and see how we could make this work. Smaller districts, what's going through our minds is, well, you know, sure, that sounds great, but a 5-year commitment, yeek, that's scary. And it's not even gonna work unless some of the larger AA school districts sign on as well. And, you know, we don't wanna get rid of the insurance company that we currently have because we don't wanna burn any bridges. So this is a really scary thing. And it seems to me it would have been really nice if they just would have added us to the pool of state employees. That seemed like a way better solution, but nobody asked me, so there we go. All right, I'll turn over.
Let me just add to those comments, again, from the perspective of the trustee. I always get a kick out of those occasions when somebody comes to you and they assume that you're thinking about asking for an increase in local property taxes, and they look at all of us trustees, and they assume that we are deliberately trying to impose some horrendous burden upon them without any thought or consideration of their circumstances or what's necessary or what's not. And I learned when I served on the city commission that the answer to that question is the same one. Remember that school board trustees, just like city commissioners, county commissioners, we are also local residents. We also pay property taxes. So we are very personally mindful of the impact of any decision to ask voters to pay a little bit more out of their pocket, whether it's to support public education, support city services, or county services. With all respect, due respect, we get that. We know because we pay those taxes too. But what we try to do as trustees, and I'm privileged to sit on the budget committee for the board, so I get to work with Brian and a couple of my fellow trustees early on. We're addressing these questions every year. Please understand, we are mindful of the impact that a requested increase will have on the community because we're going to pay it ourselves. We are mindful of our colleagues in city and county government, the pressures they are facing, trying to provide for important local services in the community. We're mindful of what a request one year will look like in relationship to another. Brian, I think, pointed out the situation we're in as opposed to St. Bo's when you're looking at asking for levies. All I ask of people is to remember those things, that we consider these questions very carefully. We process them through not only our own personal experience, and the fact that we will share in that same burden, but we also spend a lot of time, a lot of effort working with highly competent staff to figure out, do we really need to ask for something this year, or can we forego it in the interest of whether it's to help the city or the county, or to give our taxpayers a little bit of relief for a year before we come back and really need something. And that's the key. In the end, when we do come to you, it is with a sincere belief that we really, truly believe we need this, not for us personally, but again, for the people that we serve, our young people to whom we owe so much. As my dad used to say, he voted for every mill that ever came along because he would tell me, when I'm old and you're paying taxes, I expect to be supported in the manner to which I become accustomed. So, and that's part of the obligation. It's part of the paying it forward.
I'll just quickly add that Great Falls Public, at least from my research, and Brian, steal a microphone if I'm wrong, we are reaching a point though with the way things are currently funded that there will be a levy ask potentially coming in the next few years where there will still have to be cuts. So going back to the very question that was asked of Brian, at times we're reaching a point where if our student numbers don't increase to a degree and all these costs keep going up, the budget don't help. And at times things do have to be removed or eliminated or changed in ways that folks have become accustomed to, and that is painful and hard to understand. I'll give two shout outs. One, the Great Western School has been involved in a consensus building process to try and look at what the community really does believe and value and would be comfortable, maybe, if that's how I would say it, cutting, better understanding where we're at as a community. If you haven't heard of that, I would call Jackie Henry and learn a little bit more, or maybe go to the website and check out the consensus building and pay attention over the next number of months. Jackie's in the back waiting, by the way. It's a really interesting process. Other communities around the state have utilized it very successfully when you are having to make hard decisions, and our community is likely going to be up against those soon. I'll also just give a shout out to House Bill 153. I know none of us have time to sit and track bills all day, but if you have time to look that one up, take a peek at it. That's the decennial study. Every 10 years, the legislature has to look at the school funding formula by law. 20 years ago, they did, but then not a whole lot happened. 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of financial support to do a whole lot with it. This time around, we're in the midst of seeing what they'll do with it. That's a longer term look at what needs to happen, but it does have a place where community members could have a voice in saying, we need to look at this hardcore for 2025 and well beyond. What do we need to fund our schools?
One thing that the school relies on is a study that was done, that is done on birth rates in Cascade County. And it's been pretty accurate as far as what our enrollment's going to be, and the results as of late are not as promising as we'd like them to be. The projected birth rates are going to go down substantially. So we will see a decline in student numbers and have to adjust our budgets accordingly. Just to give you a picture of the other AA school districts and how we fare, big picture compared to other AA's. And when I watch the news and listen to the news, those stories jump right out and stand out like a sore thumb to me as far as AA schools that have cut music programs, that have cut teachers, that a number of things. And really, Great Falls is currently in a better position, and a lot of that has to do with how we spend our ESSER dollars. We've been through that before, where there's this big influx of federal money, and what happens, it's one time only. When it goes away, it's gone, and then federal money declines. So we knew that going in, and I think Lance Boyd did a great job managing those funds, and we're able to currently use some of those this year, even though they had to be spent out last year. There's tricks that we have learned through the years to do that. So really, we're in a better place, but we're in a better place for a while. We have to use our reserves very wisely and not all at once, just as you would with the savings account that you have. You don't spend it all at once, knowing that you've got another year to get through things. So that's where we stand big picture. If you watch the news and just listen for Kalispell, Missoula, Billings, Helena, and the stories are not good. We're in a better spot, but will we be there forever? We'll have to make adjustments and changes, and we'll stay where we are.
One of the things I'd also like to add to that is the fact that when I was in the legislature, we changed the funding formula in the 2005 session and we had put do we fund quality? There was an attempt to say we didn't give them enough money, but the result is that 2/3 of the local school boards chose to reduce taxes rather than use all the money that was available to them. So one of the things that has to happen, if you put a new component in, you're going to have some accountability that money is spent on those things, not just to lower the taxes that people have to pay, because it's there to improve quality, not just to reduce taxes. And believe me, that health insurance is one of the components I'd like to see them take a look at. On a per employee basis, put some money in for health insurance. That would go a long ways to ease the budget problems of a lot of people. And now, Nichole, it's your turn. Small rural districts have unique problems, meeting accreditation standards, hiring qualified personnel, and while being a hub for the community. What partnerships or strategies do school leaders utilize to address potential gaps in funding and programs. Do you have any examples of public-private partnerships that are successful? And I want to say one thing that when you talked about people call and say, hey, there's no opening here, come here. That tells me that they've got a quality administrator. People often say, we've got to get rid of administrators, just fund teachers. Quality administrators, principals, assistant superintendents are very, very important.
Thank you for that compliment. I've only been at Power 3 years, and I came into a great school, which I feel very lucky to have done that. So I'm just trying to not mess things up. That's my goal every day. But I would say some of the partnerships and ways that we fill those gaps. Grants are huge, but they are a lot of work. And I happened to be on a webinar the other day with some people, and basically I was told it's not worth the time to put in for this one particular grant that might help us get some increased security measures in our school, because the community makes too much money. So with that whole, the point system, when they're awarding those grants, they're like, yeah, I just don't think you would be able to get enough points in order to put together a competitive proposal. And so that's really heartbreaking, because now I'm going, okay, well, how are we going to make these upgrades? Because security systems are really expensive. And I haven't come up with a good answer. So if anybody has any ideas, feel free to see me after this. And then I would also say small businesses are just such a blessing to schools, and they help fill in those gaps. They provide not just funding, but also knowledge to our students, those businesses that welcome our students into their place of commerce for field trips and help enrich our students' lives. Those experiences are priceless. And then I would also say community members, individuals really are huge components in making a school district work. Kids need to know who their community is, and the only way that they do that is by those community members coming into the schools or inviting the students to out to teach them something, anything, ice fishing, all sorts of different things. The communities are such a wealth of knowledge, and that needs to be shared with our schools. Our teachers cannot do it all, although they do try. I will say they try. They just can't. And I guess some examples that I have of public and private partnerships that have been successful. I have to give major kudos to Laura Takis, who is our kitchen director at Power, and she has gone headfirst into this farm to school program, and we were featured in October for our school lunch program, and she tries to scratch cook as much as she possibly can, and she goes out of her way to purchase locally grown foods. We get our eggs from a resident of Power. We get our grain from farmers and ranchers in and around Power. We purchased a couple of hogs from a farmer right down the road, and but you've got to take them to a special butcher place in order to get that processed. And it doesn't happen like that. It takes people that are so committed to having these programs in schools and making them work, and our kids benefit. I feel like every day I get to eat lunch, it is a gourmet meal. It makes going home and making dinner a really sad affair. And with our farm to school, we have brought those farmers and ranchers into our school to teach our kids about what a harvester does. And they bring the harvester to the school, and kids get to climb up in it. They bring grains, and our kids ground those grains into flour. And this was just a whole farm to school day. And it wouldn't have been possible without our amazing community members. And also, it wouldn't have been possible without our teachers being able to stray from the typical curriculum and say, you know what? We want to do this. This is important for our kids to have this knowledge. That dollar for dollar tax credit, that is amazing. We get some Perkins funding, but Power doesn't get a lot because we don't have enough students in order to have all the pathways needed to get large checks. So our Perkins grant is about $2,000 to $3,000, and that doesn't go very far. It pays a stipend for a FCCLA teacher to be able to run that program, which almost our entire high school is involved in. And then we have a little bit extra that we kind of trade off and on between the business teacher and the shop teacher and our family consumer science teacher. This year is the shop teacher's turn to spend that extra money, and he really wants to get a plasma cutter. Well, those are like $3,000 to $4,000, you know? And so with that one-to-one tax donation credit, we're able to put some of those funds towards getting a plasma cutter, which is going to help give our students some hands-on experience that are interested in going into those trades. I would also say that the community is hugely involved in rewards for our students for behavior and academic awards. Just last month, we had community members come into the school and they brought whatever hobbies they like to do and teach our kids hobbies. We had beading going on, we had yoga, we had, oh my gosh, now I can't even think of all of them, but it was just like, here are community members just came into these classrooms and set up shop, and kids were really excited about it. They also provide things like, for our kids that make the honor roll, you know what? Let's take these kids on a hayride to a little campfire where they can roast marshmallows and have hot chocolate. And the whole thing takes about 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. The kids get rewarded for their efforts, and it's just a really great community building event. They get to be around those community members. They see them giving back to the school. And I feel like that is huge in character building. I think one of the quotes was, education was to build knowledge and character, you know, and so I really strongly believe that it's more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's growing to love people around you and give back to them. So I think that that's all that I have for that. I guess the last thought is giving time and knowledge is just as important as money. And so if you don't have extra funds to give, see if you can give some of your time and your knowledge to your local schools.
Yeah, just real quick, the innovative tax credit is amazing for Great Falls Public Schools. We've been #1 when it comes to AA's, and it's providing field trips that were cut for elementary students are being re-implemented. We're putting in a STEM center at Great Falls High, and just real excited. And how it works, it's a dollar for dollar tax credit for whatever check you write to the school. And next year, when you do your taxes, that completely comes off your taxes. So I encourage anybody to look more into it. We've got a lot of information on our website, and kudos to Andrew Blewett for shaking the trees and really helping.
I'll just quickly mention the foundation. So I'll wear that hat really fast too. We are really, really blessed with the Great Falls Public Schools to have the Great Falls Public School Foundation. If that's something you're not aware of, come find me after. It's a phenomenal, I would say, pretty simple way to have public-private partnerships that truly enhance education. And at times I have heard folks in our community say the businesses are so supportive, sometimes our schools bleed, our business is dry. So looking for those innovative ways to truly build those partnerships in different ways really does lead to that long-term success that we see really across the state.
Well, we only have one question left, but I do want to say about the last, when you talked about the farm school program. I gained 25 pounds the year I was out in Montana. because my prayer period was 10 o'clock when the freshly baked bread came out of the oven, and they had honey butter sitting right there. It was just the treat of the day to do that. The next question is one that if anybody chooses to answer, add in. But it said this question is that school funding may sound complex and, complex and complicated, okay? And it is. But what aspects of school funding should the public or you, the community, be aware of that you might be able to help? What improves? What do you want people to know about?
Volunteer, I know the right person.
And Don Ryan's right, it is very, very complex, but in simple forms, the formula was designed for the state providing 80% and the community being responsible for the other 20%. And know that there's a cap. Once we get to the 100% of the maximum budget, we can't increase anymore. So I think community participation is super important, and we don't ask for money unless we truly, truly need it. I do want to mention one thing. If we go back in time to 2017, when we passed our bond, that was amazing for our school district. It was amazing bond. For this reason, is that prices of construction have nearly doubled since then, and we locked in some interest rates at 3.1%, which was phenomenal. So that was a great investment in our schools and our community for a lot of years to come, and we couldn't have timed it any better. I'm sure glad we're not going enough to build a new elementary now, because really, if you look at it, we could have built half of what if we went out today, we built half of what we did back then. And we had great contractors, and they sharpened their pencils and did great work for our school district, and that will always be appreciated in my book. So I'll conclude with one thing. I've got a cartoon that I like. It's a picture, you probably can't see it very well, but it's a picture of a lot of buildings. There's a lot of big buildings, and on the side of them, there's a sign on every one of them that says jail, Jale. It says, the two people are outside looking at it and said, in hindsight, maybe they should have spent more of the state budget on education.
And I just want to mention the STAR Act that the legislature is talking about. And I think that it's a good step in the right direction, but I feel like it still needs to be reworked a lot. I just did the math with my district, and one of my teachers would need to have an $8,000 raise in order to get to that $41,000 that we would have to have everybody at. And so then if I did that, the school would get about $60,000 for a quality educator payment. 25,000 of that 60,000 would just have to be spent in order to get all of my teachers to $41,000 or more. And so then that leaves $35,000 that I have to split among the remaining teachers. And I have teachers that have been at my school for 30 plus years. And for me to say, well, this person who's been teaching 2 years is getting an $8,000 raise, and you're going to get about a $2,000 raise, is really, really hard for me to say. And I don't know, I'm really struggling with that. So I don't know. Think about that, I guess. And we do need something, but we need something that pays all of our teachers what they're worth. And we cannot forget about those teachers that are so close to retirement, and their retirement is based on what they've made the last 3 years. And so we're sending them into the world, which should be their golden years, and they're having to do what schools do, which is try to do more with less. And I just don't think that that's fair for somebody who has changed so many lives over the course of their employment.
Obviously, Don is absolutely right, as is Brian. These school funding formulas are very complex. What I always try to encourage people to think about though is don't get too bogged down in the formula. Think about it as a means to accomplish something else that's a lot more important. It requires an adjustment in our mindset when we think about education funding. We can't really think about it as a cost. We have to think about it as most businesses do when they are planning for the future. They are thinking about expenditures like that as an investment in their people, in their product, in the future of that company. If we don't take the same page out of industry and follow the same model, then we are going to get caught in the same cycle that we've been in for years. When people say, well, it's just costing too much. My response is, it is a lot of money, but how much more are we going to pay or lose down the road if we fail to make that investment today?
Let's quickly wrap up here with, as I pondered the last number of weeks, the title of this event is Public Education Under Attack. I really sat with that. And truthfully, for me personally, I don't feel that it's under attack. I feel there's a lot of misunderstanding, probably a lot of misinformation. And as the probably one person here that truly doesn't wear a formal hat in the public education sector, when I looked at that question and knew that it was coming, I think by doing what we can do, by truly having conversations with your family, knowing who your local legislator is and telling them that you care about public education, that in and of itself can be remarkably impactful. We didn't get this far, as we have in Montana, without a lot of work. And we have a lot of work ahead of us still to come for that true 21st century education that we want for our students and we know for those that are yet to come. But I really do believe by working through these challenges, bipartisan, both sides of the aisle, folks who don't have a clue standing up and saying, I don't get it, why isn't this working? Sometimes those are some of the best questions we can truly ask to stimulate some really great conversation.
A couple of things I do want to add just quickly is the fact that I'm very concerned about the federal government walking away from education and the funding. They've put a lot of money in the last 4 years in the federals and grants, and many of the districts have used those grants to fund education, different programs and that kind of stuff. If that goes away, we will have to cut those programs or find the resources to do it. So please don't let them kill the Department of Education. The federal government is putting requirements on us, especially like in special ed. You know, last time I was in the legislature, I said, you know, if we do this, we've got to increase our state funding for special ed. And what I heard from one of the top Republicans in the House in education was, we can't do that because the school districts will just label every kid special ed just to get more money. That was some of the thought process that we were dealing with. It didn't make a lot of sense. And honestly, this is the other one that I heard, and hope we've got to keep the legislature honest. The head of the Republican Education Committee one year was a lady from Fromberg. And what she said about teachers was this: we don't need to raise teacher salaries. Those are good jobs for farmers' wives. Oh. Those were the scary things that you deal with in that kind of stuff, and how to get through that thought process. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn this over now to Melissa because she's taking questions. I want to thank you. And before I give the mic up, I just want to tell you one of the things I heard today. With all of that terrible weather that's going on down in Louisiana and Florida, we never had those problems when it's called the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, so the first question is, some of us recently attended listening sessions at the district offices. What are the top takeaways from those sessions?
Oh, Jackie.
I think Jackie is probably the best one to answer, right? I can speak to participating in that. Bill suggesting I speak to that. I did have the opportunity to participate and it was fantastic. If you really truly want to learn how to listen, I would invite you to participate in a consensus building listening session. It teaches you how to listen in ways I've never thought of before. It really opened up some fantastic conversation on some really challenging topics about what the district should be focusing on from a community lens. I'm going to speak more specifically to the outcome because I won't summarize the 3-page summary well.
Hi, I'm Jackie Maybringer. I'm one of the executive directors for Great Falls Public Schools, and we did do just 7, I believe, listening sessions with community members, and some of the key takeaways were, as Jamie said, you guys talked about a lot tonight too at this panel, was teacher retention and recruitment. We want to make sure we have, our community wants to make sure that we have high quality teachers in our classrooms, opportunities, and having students be well prepared when they leave us, I believe was another key takeaway. The student listening session that we did, that was a resounding takeaway. The students don't want to lose opportunities or choices in their education. They want to leave us with as well prepared as they can be for what they decide to do in their future. And I think those are probably the 2 highlights that we'll stick with. Thank you.
And then the final question is, who is carrying the STARS legislation in the Montana legislature?
Yeah, Representative Lou Jones Conrad has been working on it, but he's probably going to have Senator Gillespie from the Shelby area actually carry it forward.
The bill dropped yesterday. It's SB 252.
Yeah.
15 signatures.
Can you repeat that for the
Senate Bill 252. Thanks, John.
And I'm sorry, I just got handed a question. Can we redirect marijuana funds to education taxes?
I'll play.
The question, as I understand, can we direct marijuana funds to education? Short answer to that, everybody wants a piece of the marijuana. And as you saw during the last session, when a coalition of people on all sides of the political spectrum got together and came up with a proposal for spending that money on public infrastructure, that bill got crossways with some unusual interpretations of rules in the legislature. It ended up in court, and it never got anywhere in the end. I view this marijuana thing the same way a lot of other programs that have been adopted through the years. A lot of people look at it and say, that's the solution for funding education. We'll just take that money and put it into that pot, and then all of our problems are solved. That is not a very thoughtful solution to the problem, because invariably what happens is, one, you have too much competition from other very valid programs and projects for those resources. And then second, as Brian and some of us have harped on this evening, inflation is a reality when it comes to public school funding, just like it is anywhere else. And if you think those funds are going to be sufficient to carry the load, say, for public education, you're sorely mistaken.
You know, I want to weigh into this because this kind of issue was brought up with the cigarette tax funds in the legislature. And Eric Pieper really got mad at me when I didn't vote to put the cigarette tax money straight to education. When we put a sin tax in, we should use it to correct the problems that it causes. I told Eric Pieper, I'm not in favor of a light up for education plan for kids. You know, let's smoke some cigarettes, this will help the schools. Let's smoke, you know, that doesn't make sense. Use it to fix the problems that are there rather than just the source.
Okay, and I was handed another question, which please, if somebody else has another question, just bring it to me. It's a two-parter. To increase local funding, can we ask for small tax levy increases preemptively? That's part one.
Yeah, I think we're at a point where preemptively, we're behind the 8 ball now when it comes to funding. After giving our employees roughly 4% raises for the last 2 years, we're really probably behind that 8 ball. It's something we could consider and take those small steps, but at this point in time, a small levy won't get us to the next goal line.
And then the second part is, how can we increase state funding past the 80%?
Yeah, I would lay that on the legislature, because the legislature is responsible for school funding. It falls squarely in their purview, and that's where it starts. And I think the STARS Act is a point of an attempt to get schools more money. It has some things to get worked out, obviously, but it's an attempt. And this legislative session for schools is probably not the friendliest legislative session we'll have. So if it weren't for Jones, who's a Republican, carrying this one bill that has a lot of money in it, that we wouldn't see a lot of other bills that say, let's give more money to schools.
I'm just going to say from that levy standpoint, passing levies, at least for great public schools, is not an easy. In fact, it's like a mountain beyond a decline. And that's coming from someone who's volunteered doing it. So if you're interested in helping us pass levies, please come talk to me after too. Because it actually takes quite a bit of private dollars to make it happen and a ridiculous number of volunteer hours. So we would take all the volunteers we can get.
But you got it done.
We did get it done.
Jerry, you want to talk?
Is anyone else want to speak? I want to thank you all for coming. This has been a long time in coming. We've done things with the schools before with Great Falls Rising, but I think that this is such a critical year. And my question for all of you, but you don't have to answer it tonight, is how this is wonderful. We have a number of people hearing what's going on. How do we let the rest of our community know what is happening and what we hope will happen? So just think about that, because all of us need to go to our neighbors. We talk about funding. Do you think that 95% of the people in Great Falls even know what school funding is? No. The answer is no. And so we really need to get that word out to the schools. The other thing we need to get out to the schools, out to the community, is how our school system handled the ESSER, the federal funding during the pandemic, in relation to how others did. And it was superb. They did it well. There were funds left over that, are being spent. And I think we really have to give great credit. We had a Great Falls Public Schools Foundation start about 13, 14 years ago. And we worked tirelessly on getting funds from the people to do scholarships or grants for different things like field trips and so forth. I mean, these are the things, sure, there are things that are bad because of state funding, but this school system, and I dare say from hearing what Nichole says about power, they're doing a good job and they're working hard at it. Let's give credit for these things. Yes, 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 yes. Wonderful people who, by the way, are not surrounding our president with their billions of dollars. So congratulations to the schools and the work that they're doing for the kids. The problems are mounting, and it's not because of the schools. It's because of pandemics. It's because of the phones that are being put away. I just have to congratulate the schools for that. I think it's wonderful. And we have our superintendent, Heather, is here, Heather Hoyer, and you've already met Jackie. Do we have other school administrators, teachers, etc. here? If so, would you please stand up? Please stand up. They're doing the work, and guess what? They're not leaving. And also, is Becky Nelson still here? Well, Becky is the one who originated High Voltage Weekend, which has been talked about but not given a label to, where the student teachers are being brought in, and it's incredible. And I think it's the third weekend in February, and
Literature's up on the desk there. Curious.
okay,
21 through 24.
yes, and a fantastic idea, and this was given birth in Great Falls. So let's think about the really good things that are happening. Tell your neighbors, have them get involved, but also we've got legislative booklets over there, and I've got a bunch more if that pile is receding. That'll give you all the information about your legislators, bills, etc., how you call 444-4800. You know, I think we all have it imprinted behind our eyeball. But get involved, get your neighbors involved. If there's a sign put out that you can do, put the sign out. Because our public schools are terrific and we need them and our kids need them. So thank you all for coming. We have, again, literature out there and cookies and drinks and so forth. So hang around a little bit if you'd like to, and keep supporting your local public schools. Thank you.